From the bottom of my heart, a warm welcome to Dove, the Diary of Volunteers on Earth. Like I already mentioned in the trailer and in last episode, or in the first episode I should say, I will try to make this a bilingual podcast with both German and with English. And as some of you might have noticed, this week I published my first diary entry with guests with Johanna and Bernhard in German. And because translating interviews with two or more people is kind of weird, and I don't really want the podcast to sound like a 80s TV show from Soviet Russia where you just have one narrator voice-overing everybody else, I figured I'm gonna try and do it like this. So I will just recap the German interviews in English every week and vice versa. So if I happen to have an English interview or English speaking guests, I will do the recap in German. And this comes with the advantage that I can add some additional thoughts because if you know me, you know that I'm a sucker for philosophy, psychology, personal development, and whatnot. Or what people in my group of friends commonly know as knowledge. Or the knowledge, I should say. So before I blah blah too much, without further ado, let's start the first deep dive into this week's diary entry, which was about unser Bauerngarten, which literally means our farmer's garden. And if you have listened to the interview in German, then you already know that I had the pleasure of talking to two very good friends, Johanna and Bernhard, aka Honey and Bernie. And the three of us share one big passion, and some of you might have guessed it already, that passion is scouting. I've gotten to know both of them through scouting, and they also met each other and fell in love with each other through scouting. So it's actually kind of a romantic story. Like, I don't mean like a love triangle, but between the two of them, of course. So expectedly, a big portion of our podcast together was about scouting, and we started by trying to explain to people who might not be very familiar with the World Scout movement what that actually is. So Bernie put it quite simply as the largest youth movement in the world. And I looked it up. It has about 50 million members, counting together both major organizations in more than 170 countries. So I'm not going to dive too deep into scouting specifics because this most likely is not going to be the last episode featuring scouts. But I would like to address a few points that Honey and Bernie and myself raised in our talk from Monday. So when I asked the both of them about what has made scouting so special for them, they basically agreed that a lot of it has to do with the value-based system and the value-based framework of pedagogics. I always butcher that word. I hope it's pronounced pedagogics, that are being conveyed in scouting. So the aim of this framework is basically to help young people, young adults and youths to develop into responsible and helpful and independent, as well as critically thinking people. Groundbreaking, right? No, but for real. What stood out to us was that during your quote-unquote career as a scout, you are being constantly asked to reflect on yourself, reflect on the promise that you give as a scout, and to reflect on said value system and whether or not you still agree with it and it still fits your own personal value compass, to put it that way. So, two major pillars in the Scout system are the Scout laws and the Scout promise, like I already said. And the two of them are tightly connected to each other. So the Scout promise, as directly translated from German, goes as follows. I promise on my honor that I will do my best to serve God and my country, to help my fellow humans, and to live by our laws. And I'll get back to that later, but before that I will just tell you quickly what the 8 Scout laws in Austria are. A Scout is loyal and helps where he or she can. A Scout respects every human and attempts to understand them. A Scout looks for a way to God. A Scout reflects, decides, and acts afterwards, which is not particularly my strength, I guess. A Scout lives simply and protects nature. A Scout is happy and undaunted. A Scout uses his or her skills. A Scout leads a healthy life. All right, now even in conservative Austria, there is an ongoing debate on whether or not we should still include God in those Scout laws and in that Scout promise. And personally, the last time I adapted my personal Scout promise, because once in a while you get the opportunity to adapt and refresh your Scout promise for yourself. And when I did that the last time, I did not include God, but I substituted it for, quote, the search for the meaning of life. And that probably sounds as stupid as it does. And now I actually ended up diving rather deep into the Scout lore and the system behind the whole movement. But I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from, where this podcast is coming from, and yeah, like I said, it's not going to be the last episode including Scouts and Scouting. So, we talked about a few other things as well in the context of Scouting, and one of those things was how all of us have taken on and learned and been equipped with a lot of things throughout Scouting that we can also use in everyday contexts and in our professional lives and friendships, relationships, whatnot. One example that Bernie gave was the importance of working in teams and how we can define our personal roles in group settings. And he gave an anecdote where he came back from a seminar. Actually, one of the deep, well, it's the highest level of the training that you can get as a Scout leader in Austria. And he came back from that seminar, which is a week, and it's all about roles in groups and group dynamics. And he went on holidays with his non-Scout friends. And he just thought it was super interesting to see how different people are that are not equipped with those kind of tools. And yeah, I really can't emphasize that enough, as I have in the past on my blog or wherever, and I also will in the future, because Scouting has massively influenced and shaped my life. It has opened the door to the world for me when I was 15, and when I joined a so-called World Scout Jamboree for the first time in the UK. That was back in 2007. And there is, well, to explain the term Jamboree, in Austria it has kind of been an urban Scout myth that Jamboree means like literally in Swahili means a peaceful gathering of all tribes. But I actually like couldn't find any source on that. So I guess we were always just told that that's the case. Supposedly it derives from Jambo, which just means hello in Swahili, and the founder of the Scout movement spent a significant amount of time in Africa and in Kenya. So people think that he was inspired by that. So what is a World Scout Jamboree? Well, along with 50,000 other young people between the age of 14 and 18, we came together for one massive summer camp. And those people are from all across the globe. And in the past 15 years, so half of my life, I've had the privilege to meet so many amazing people and make so many friendships in all corners of the planet, and all of that through scouting. And I'll be forever grateful for that. And I've told them multiple times, I think, shout out to my parents for sending me to my first scout meeting when I was about 7. But enough of the sweet talk now, because this is not going to be a Scout Hype podcast. We also talked about some negative aspects and some things that we thought still need to improve. For example, Hani talked about the inclusion of marginalized groups or young people with migrational backgrounds, especially in Austria. We all believe and agreed that we've got long ways to go in that regard, and that there's still a lot of improvements to make, because scouting occasionally does seem a little bit bubbly. And I also asked Hani and Bernie how they've dealt with setbacks and frustration in the past. And just to give a little context and background info for you guys listening, Bernie was the project leader for an international scout camp that was to be held in our home state in Styria in Austria back in 2021. It was called the AUFI National Jamboree, but it had to be cancelled because of COVID, of course. So we talked a little bit about that, and Bernie explained that he felt that the important lesson for him to take away from that was that was the lesson, actually, that you have to take away something from your experiences, no matter how hard the setback and no matter how hard the failure and the frustration. So in other words, I guess, just a positive sort of mistake culture where you look at what you might have done incorrectly, or maybe there wasn't anything that you could have done differently, and then just learn from it and apply it in your next experience and in the next situation. And that goes especially for situations where you feel like you have done everything that was in your power. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about volunteering in a broader sense. And of course, I was curious where their motivation derives from. And Hani put it very simply. She said to her, it's always been friendship. That was always the motivating factor. And I added to that also a sense of belonging, because so many situations you kind of are like, I don't really feel like doing it, but I will still go because in the end, I'll just enjoy being with the people and I'll just enjoy being with my friends. And for me personally, that also couldn't be more true, especially the belonging part, because throughout most of my time in school, I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged to any group. I wasn't part of the popular kids. I wasn't part of the jocks or the sports people. I wasn't really part of the nerds either. But with scouting, I've always kind of felt that sense of belonging. And something that I didn't really anticipate before our talk and before we recorded, but it somehow came up during, was the privilege of being able to volunteer. And Hani had a very strong opinion on that. She explained how it is certainly a privilege in Austria to volunteer somewhere because you can afford the time and the resources to volunteer. And she mentioned, or added, I should say, that it seems kind of odd and kind of ridiculous, actually, considering the fact that so many institutions in Austria are relying upon volunteers. And I'd actually be curious if some of you are listening from other countries. Maybe drop me a comment or an email or wherever. Because I don't really know how it is in other countries if, for example, ambulances or firefighters. In Austria, a lot of that is based on volunteering. So let me know how it is in your country. Looking forward to it. And that was basically the first half of the whole podcast. And then in the second half, I asked Hani and Bernie about their newest endeavor and especially their business endeavors. And at the same time, what they both considered to be their great vision that has come to life this year. Because earlier this year, in May, I believe, no, maybe even earlier, I don't know, they opened up, like I mentioned in the beginning, UNSER BAUERNGARTEN. An idea that they both had years ago, basically first when they came together, and that idea started to grow in their heads. It started as the dream to one day live on their own farm, like in a romanticized kind of way with animals and kind of rustic. But after a while, they kind of realized that it is very unrealistic in Austria because a lot of farming is being passed down within the families, and it's kind of hard if you don't have a background or your family doesn't have a background in agriculture or in farming or whatever. It's very hard to get a hold of land, properties, whatnot. But like with so many people, the pandemic also changed how they saw their own vision, and it kind of made them reflect. And I loved how Hani put this. It made them reflect on how they want to shape their lives, but also the lives of others and their contribution to our society. So that's what they were talking about during the pandemic. And they were also inspired by a book that I should mention called The Market Gardener by Jean-Martin Fortier, who I believe is Canadian. And it's all about how you can set up a small structured market gardening business, I guess. I don't like the word business, but for the lack of a better term, we'll use it. And with that in hand and with all that knowledge, they were able to come closer to making their dream happen. And they figured, it's actually a realistic scenario. And we can actually afford this with a credit. And yeah, why not do it? So that's basically exactly what they did over the last couple of years. And for me as an observer, it's been really cool and really motivating. And I told them in the podcast, I really think, to me, they are doers. They are people who have ideas and then put them into reality. And I personally have them as role models, even when it comes to this podcast, because I used to be kind of a talker. At least that's my self view. I don't know if other people see it differently, perhaps. But they did it, and they've done it, and they couldn't have done it with the help of a lot of people that they shouted out in the interview as well. And yeah, we also talked about, well, Honey said this too, and I thought that was really cool because oftentimes in certain situations, it doesn't feel to us like we are doing something brave. But looked at it from the outside, a lot of people admire you for being so brave for what you do. So people have told me this too, for quitting my job, and people have been telling them, oh, it's so brave what you do. And she said, it doesn't even matter what you do, as long as you do what gives you purpose and what fulfills you. Because if you do what fulfills you, you are living to your full potential. And I thought that was fucking beautiful. So yeah, take that with you. And before I end this recap, just one more thing that I almost forgot. We also talked about the opportunity of woofing, working opportunities on organic farms. And that's something that you can also do in Graz, in Austria, with UNSER BAUERNGARTEN, with Bernie and Honey. They offer woofing opportunities, and they've had a couple of woofers this year already helping them, and we talked a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages. And for those of you who don't know, woofing is, I think it's something really cool where you can just work on organic farms for, how do you say that in English? Kost und Logis. Well, a room and meals, basically. And the rest, you just work there for free, and it's great when you're traveling. It's you can just. I have a really good friend who woofed in Jamaica, for example. I know of a lot of people who go woofing in Australia or in New Zealand. Over there, it's super popular, I believe. So yeah, you might want to check that out if you are interested in that. And with that, I believe I'm going to end this first deep dive and recap of the last entry of Dove. And because I forgot it in the interview, I'm going to end this recap with a bird call. Bra, bra.